Good morning, friends, and welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Sāmaṇera Nipako. Today, this is a pre-recorded video as I am over at Dharma Drum in New York on a silent retreat. So if you have any questions about this, you are free to reach out to me with the contact information below, or ask questions to any of the monastics during a monk chat, as I'm sure they would also be happy to answer any questions. So today we are going to be going over one of my most favorite yet very short suttas, Itivuttaka 92, Sangati Kanna Sutta, the corner of the cloak. So as the title of this video implies, it's about how to be close to the Buddha. And when you have a being who is so incredible as the Buddha, who to be closer to, who better to be closer to than him? So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddha, our original teacher, and the only reason why we're all gathered here today. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Right, if you would like to follow along, this will be linked in the description, or if you know how to navigate Sutta Central, that Bhante Sujata's translation is the one that I will be using today. So beginning with the sutta. This was said by the Buddha, the perfected one. That is what I heard. Mendicants, suppose a mendicant were to hold the corner of my cloak, his robe, and follow behind me step by step. Yet they covet sensual pleasures, they're infatuated, full of ill will and malicious intent. They are unmindful, lacking situational awareness and immersion, with straying minds and undisciplined faculties. Then they are far from me, and I from them. Why is that? Because that mendicant does not see the teaching. Not seeing the teaching, they do not see me. So, in this little paragraph, there is a lot said and a lot to be reflected upon here. So, for one, when he's saying, yet they covet sensual pleasures, this is another way of saying that sense restraint is very important. This is something that I went over in a different sutta recently. Last week, it was the talk called The Unfailing Practice. And one of the things that is most important is restraint of the senses. So that means restraint of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And while this sounds simple, once you actually do it, it's much harder to actually do, especially if something is very addictive or we really enjoy or we think we enjoy it. For example, I was never a drinker, but I've heard from many people that were drinkers, especially in social settings, they realized that once they gave up alcohol, it wasn't that their friends so much liked them. They liked that they drank with them. Let that sink in. And while this isn't true for everybody, I'm sure there are friends out there who are very supportive of a friend that doesn't want to drink and are potentially happy to have a designated driver, or maybe it provides a mirror for a problem that they might have. Either way, this is one of those things that is very, very common for people to have a hard time at giving up. Not only is it a form of sense restraint, but it is also one of the five precepts and the one that most often people will have the hardest time with or the most um, begrudging feelings towards. So, if you're coveting sensual pleasures, If you're craving after them, if you're chasing them, if you are indulging in them, if you're not at least trying to rein in that crazy, wild animal that wants to increase pleasurable things by eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and run away from unpleasant things by eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, we're very far away from the Buddha. So, this is the first step. The Buddha doesn't even mention precepts here, which are vital. He mentions sensual pleasures. This is one of those things where often, if people have taken on the 5 precepts, especially if they've just taken it on blindly as like, I'm just going to follow this, but I'm not going to train in it, they think, oh, it's fine. I can have as many cookies as I want. I can have as much pizza as I want. I can have as much sex as I want, consensual, of course, because they're following the precepts. I can indulge in all of these sensual pleasures and it won't be to my detriment. By following the 5 precepts, that is what the Buddha says is the bare minimum to have a human rebirth or higher in future lives. So following the precepts is a good thing, but they alone are not enough. We need to work on our attachment to sensual pleasures and our aversion to things that we find unpleasant. This is that first step to seeing the Buddha. And combine this with training in the precepts, it is a very, very powerful practice. And on this same note of training in the precepts versus it being a blind practice, something that could be akin to attachment to rites and rituals, is reflecting, why is it beneficial? And this is true for coveting of sense pleasures as well. Why is it beneficial to be restrained in the senses? What are the drawbacks? What are the benefits of not killing, not stealing, not committing sexual misconduct, not lying, and not using intoxicants that cause heedlessness? And on the sexual misconduct one, another way you'll actually see it translated sometimes is sensual misconduct. So on point with this sensual pleasure thing as well. I can tell you all sorts of drawbacks to sexual pleasures. I could go on and on about this from my own experience, but that doesn't matter. If you're just hearing these words, it can be like, yes, Sāmaṇera, I agree with you. But then when the rubber hits the road, you cave. That means there's a difference between the intellectual understanding and the actual experiential understanding. And the only way that you'll be able to gain this understanding is by reflecting on this. What are the drawbacks of sensual pleasures? What is the danger? What is the gratification? And what is the escape? The Buddha goes over this in many, many, many suttas. A good starting point for the danger, because you certainly understand the gratification, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it, is that it is impermanent. See how unsatisfying these things are. This is a good place to start. Perhaps the sensual pleasure you wanted, it doesn't matter what it is, wasn't as good as you wanted. Or maybe it was great, but it only lasted 5, 10 minutes, maybe a couple hours if it was something like a good concert. But it ends. It can't continue forever. And if it did, you get bored of it at some point anyway. So even that enjoyment of it is impermanent. Even food, even incredibly delicious food, if you eat that delicious food every single day, just due to diminishing returns, it's impermanent that you're going to continue to enjoy it. Or if someone forced you to eat that delicious food when you were full, you would probably be averse to it because you would feel like you're going to throw up or your stomach's going to pop or whatever else. Even though it's that same delicious food, because the context is different, our experience is different. So again, I can tell you all these sorts of things and more, but you need to look at your own experience. What is drawing you in? And if it's not obvious, dig deep. Don't accept the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th answer. Why am I doing this? What is attracted to this? And what are the drawbacks? Constantly. This is such an accessible practice. Every single day you can practice this because you cannot escape your eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind. You have all of those individually that make up your world experience. So work with them. They're there. It's incredible that you have this human life, you have a human body, you've taken your time out of the day to listen to the Dhamma today, to learn how to increase your practice, and you have these means of practice that are always available. So, not coveting sensual pleasures. And then, on a similar note, they're infatuated, full of ill will and malicious intent. They are unmindful, lacking situational awareness and immersion, with straying minds and undisciplined faculties. So, the ill will and malicious intent can be similar to sexual pleasures. In fact, I would even say that ill will is a sexual pleasure of its own. It is so intoxicating, especially if it's something righteous. Like you see somebody that has been hurt unjustly, and we get angry about it. And while that's understandable, it never helps the situation out. And when I say that, I know there will be, if enough people watch this, think that's absurd. Anger has helped me in many situations, and that is why it is so intoxicating. We think it helps. It does provide a certain motivation, and maybe it does actually help us do good things on certain occasions, but that does not take away from the unwholesome nature of it. Instead, how can you go about doing those wholesome, needed things without that ill will and malicious intent? It's not easy. And if it arises, how can you see it and not act out on it? How can you still act appropriately and yet have as little influence as possible from that ill will? If you're somebody that wants to be close to the Buddha, this is non negotiable. Anger and ill will are the one thing in the entire Pali Sutta Pitaka that the Buddha says he encourages the killing of. And that's no small thing. So, again, this is one of those things where I can talk about the drawbacks of anger for days. But if I just tell you that it's not going to land, it's something that you need to look at your own experience. Where have you put your foot in the mouth? How have you hurt yourself and others through anger? Even if you have managed to do beneficial things with anger, how many more times have you hurt yourself and others with it? How do you justify it? What makes it so delicious and intoxicating? What makes people want to always justify it? What makes you tick? If there is suffering, so anger, that means something is being clung to. And that's where we need to look. That's where our practice is. Has somebody said something or done something that threatens our sense of self? Great. That means we know where to practice. That means perhaps we've had a blind spot showed to us where we didn't realize we were attached to this idea about ourselves in that way. Perhaps they said something that was true and we don't want to accept it. It feels hurtful. Again, great. That was kind of them that even though upsetting you will have likely caused them some trouble as well, they took the time, whether skillfully or unskillfully, but bonus points if it was skillfully, to point this out to you. And either way, if they have a good point, if it is something you need to work on, regardless of if it was done nicely or not. Again, great, you've had a blind spot pointed out. Now you know where to work. An ill will and malicious intent, it shows up in so many forms. You can hear something, you can see something, and it can be so tiny. Like at monasteries, you often hear that when people are on silent retreat, that if somebody is breathing too loud, they want to go and strangle them or yell at them or tell them, stop breathing so loud. This is obnoxious. Or they don't like the way that they look at them, or perhaps their mindfulness is lacking, so they're sloppy in their work, or whatever it may be. People don't even need to talk to you for ill will to come up. We like to make things that aren't our business our business. We like to judge in unskillful ways because there is skillful judging. For example, what we're going over now is skillful ways to judge yourself, to be in alignment and close to the Buddha. So keep an eye out for this. As somebody that is especially prone to aversion, so this ill will and malicious intent, I was shocked just how subtle this can be sometimes. It's not always obvious. Plenty of times there were situations in the past where I would have said, with the same feelings that I have in body and mind, I'm not angry, I'm not upset, either because I literally could not see it or was unwilling to accept it. So keep an eye out. Start with the things that are obvious, and over time, you can begin to understand your mind more. And this is also a sense restraint of sort, of the mind. By not acting out of ill will and malicious intent, that is a sense restraint of the mind. Because, as I said, this emotion is so intoxicating, just like that. Flip a switch. I come from an Irish Italian family where people are very angry and are exactly like that. Just flip a switch, snap of fingers, fireworks. And they won't admit they're angry. Or they'll know they're angry and they'll justify it over some either minor disagreement or some frustration. And it causes suffering for everybody around them. So, this is another very accessible practice anybody can do. Unless you're somebody that is free from ill will, which is highly unlikely if you're on YouTube, but I guess it is possible. These sorts of emotions are going to arise. Pay attention to them, understand them, the gratification, the danger, and the escape. And this will be a way you can get closer to the Buddha. You are killing the one thing he approved of killing, and at the same time, practicing sense restraint of the mind. Similar to these two, or not necessarily similar, but related, is that following sentence I had said. They are unmindful, lacking situational awareness and immersion, with straying minds and undisciplined faculties. So they are unmindful. So this could be like what I was talking about with the ill will. There were many times where I was unaware of the fact that I was unmindful. So because I was unmindful, I put my foot in my mouth. I caused harm with my speech. Sensual pleasures. There are many times where I was unmindful about my craving for something, and I caused myself to be sick by eating too much of something, or if I had aversion, making myself sick by avoiding it, and so on. So I was unmindful of my coveting of sexual pleasures and my aversion to ones I don't like. Similarly, there's many times where people do things like stumble and they hurt themselves, break an elbow, break a leg, something worse. And that unmindfulness, lack of situational awareness caused harm for them and potentially other people. So this mindfulness, this remembering is also incredibly important. Sati, mindfulness, one way you'll hear it talked about, it is literally remembering. calling to mind. So that's like when you're about to insult your neighbor for blowing snow from their driveway into your driveway, which you had just snow blowed. Instead of lashing out at them, looking into a way to deal with this skillfully. And if this is a reoccurring problem, if you have very disrespectful neighbors, this could be incredibly frustrating. It would be so much easier to just not be mindful and get angry. But because of this mindfulness, because of this situational awareness, you're able to act skillfully. You can't control what your annoying neighbors are doing, but you can control what you're doing. That is the only thing you have control over. And this might take a while. I like to tell people that back in the day, before I started to practice Buddhism, I used to just live from my eyebrows up. I basically didn't have a body. I was incredibly unmindful about what I was doing unless I was in the woods or something. Being in my body was just too painful in most situations. I couldn't bear it. And this unmindfulness caused lots of problems. There were other times where I was very mindful, like I said, in the woods, for example, in places I liked when I had my sensual pleasures appeased. But it wasn't until I started to practice the Dhamma that I started to have a body, that I started to have more situational awareness, that I was able to keep my mind here instead of daydreaming all the time. So no straying mind and undisciplined faculties. I don't have to look around here and there. I don't have to see who's walking by. I don't need to look at the car. I don't need to look in the direction of that delicious smell. And this is especially true when I am out on alms round. I don't have to look around. And there's been some monastics that I go out with where they're just looking all around the place. Just they see somebody walk by, they'll look at them, and they'll walk them past. They'll look at the car that's pulling up behind us. They'll look just all around the place. It's a straying mind and undisciplined faculty, lacking of their own interior situational awareness, which that's where they are. So, all right, you always have to start from where you are. So if that's where you are, great. You know where you need to work. That's fine. You can now take that step towards being closer to the Buddha. This straying mind and undisciplined faculties, I would also say, is another way of restraining the senses. And I love too how this all just ties back to that. Such a key, underemphasized point. And when it is talked about, it's usually as a way of helping out your meditation instead of as a prerequisite, when really it's a prerequisite. So do not underestimate the power of this practice of restraining your senses. And if you want more about this, you can go look at the talk that I did last week because I did about an hour of it. So incredibly powerful. Because if your mind is straying and if you have undisciplined faculties, that means you are looking at the features and details with your eyes, with your nose, with your ears, with your tongue, with your body, or with your mind. That means you're seeking things outwardly, or you're making what is outward the problem. Like, oh, this man in front of me is super handsome. Instead of making that the problem, I see this craving in my mind. I would love to date him. I would love to look like that. Or alternatively, this man in front of me is really ugly and you feel repulsed. I don't want to be anywhere near him. I bet he's a terrible person. And you come up with all these ideas in your straying mind. So instead of thinking outside is the problem, because it's not, recognizing that it's inside that is where the problem lies. And that's great news because you can learn to control that wild, crazy animal in your mind with sense restraint. So, very briefly, to go over the practices I had mentioned before, namely in the danger and the gratification and the escape. The danger is that things are impermanent, suffering, and perishable. The gratification is the pleasure and happiness that arise from the khandhas. And the escape is the removing and giving up desire and greed for the khandhas. And I just happen to have a note about this on my desk here. And if you would like to read more about this particular note is from Samyutta Nikaya 22.82, lines 10.1 is where it starts. So let that sink in. Moving on to the second paragraph. Suppose a mendicant were to live 100 leagues away, so very far away. You could think like 100 or 1,000 miles away. Yet they do not covet sensual pleasures. They're not infatuated or full of ill will and malicious intent. They have established mindfulness, situational awareness, and immersion with unified mind and restrained faculties. Then they are close to me, and I to them. Why is that? Because that mendicant sees the teaching. Seeing the teaching, they see me. So let me repeat these two paragraphs together. Mendicants, suppose a mendicant were to hold the corner of my cloak and follow behind me step by step. Yet they covet sensual pleasures. They are infatuated, full of ill will and malicious intent. They are unmindful, lacking situational awareness and immersion, with straying minds and undisciplined faculties. Then they are far from me and I from them. Why is that? Because that mendicant does not see the teaching. Not seeing the teaching, they do not see me. Suppose a mendicant were to live 100 leagues away, yet they do not covet sensual pleasures. They're not infatuated or full of ill will and malicious intent. They have established mindfulness, situational awareness, and immersion with unified mind and restrained faculties. Then they are close to me and I to them. Why is that? Because that mendicant sees the teaching. Seeing the teaching, they see me. What wonderful news. We're very far away from the Buddha now. He passed away into Parinirvana some 2,600 years ago. And if you are in the West, like I'm in New Jersey right now, you can't get much further than northern India than New Jersey. So we're much further than 100 leagues away, even if the Buddha were still alive today. And yet, by restraining the senses, by not being infatuated with ill will and malicious intent, by establishing mindfulness, situational awareness, and immersion with unified mind and restrained faculties, we can be close to the Buddha. And these are all things, as I have repeatedly said, are always at our disposal. You might not always be able to sit down and practice mindfulness of the breath in stressful situations. And even if you're able to in that moment, it's not going to be the same as when we're in meditation. But these are always accessible, no matter how stressful the situation is. We can make the choice. We cannot act out of sensual pleasures and restrain our faculties. We cannot act out of ill will and malicious intent. And even when these things arise, we can understand it, the suffering that is inherent with them, and why we don't see the suffering that is inherent in them. Because again, I can talk about this all I want, and if you don't see it for yourself, it doesn't matter. Great, you know where your practice is. I keep saying this over and over again because it's really, really important. You are the only one who can do this. I cannot make you restrain your senses. I cannot make you understand your ill will and malicious intent. I cannot make you mindful. I cannot have you remember, be mindful of these teachings in tough moments. I cannot prevent your mind from straying or discipline your faculties. This is something only you can do. So if you want to be close to the Buddha, so that's really what this comes down to. Do you want to be close to the Buddha? Do you want to be close to the Blessed One? Do you want to be like him? Do you want to be like his disciples? Whether you're a Ananda or a more of a Mahakassapa, wherever you fall on that scale, do you want to be near the Blessed One? And if the answer is yes, even if you don't think that arahantship or even stream entry is realistic for you in this lifetime, these practices are non-negotiable. You have to figure them out. He doesn't talk about meditation here. He talks about these prerequisites, these requirements. And what's incredible is if you practice these things, even if you're not aiming for stream entry, they will get you there. Because as the Buddha says here, that mendicant sees the teaching. If you see the teaching, that means you're at least some level of enlightenment. So these 2 paragraphs, so short, so sweet, so beautiful, so simple, yet so difficult, can get you all the way to awakening. Incredible. Incredible. And how kind of him to put it into such a short, understandable package. So, going to the poetry, which mostly repeats what is in the first 2 paragraphs, the Buddha spoke this matter. On this it is said, one full of desire and distress may follow close behind, yet see how distant they are, the stirred from the still, the burning from the quenched, the greedy from the greedless. An astute person who has understood and directly known the teaching grows calm like a lake unstirred by the wind. See how close they are, the still to the still, the quenched to the quenched, the greedless to the greedless. This too is a matter that was spoken by the Blessed One. That is what I heard. So before I bring this talk to a close, I personally love to read the suttas out loud. I find this to be very beneficial. And I have a channel that does just this, which I will also link below if you're somebody that is interested in listening to the suttas. This helps me when I see it, like on the screen in front of me, and I hear it, to remember it. It might not be word to word, but I remember the important parts. That way, when ill will or sensual pleasures, or I realize that I'm unmindful or lacking situational awareness, my mind is straying, my faculties are undisciplined, they're more likely to come to me, especially if it's something that I've repeated often. So, since this is a short sutta, I'm going to read it from the beginning to the end. While I'm doing this, you can let the words just hit you, absorb them. How can you practice this going forward? How can you take this into your daily life? I've already given quite a few examples, but you don't want to take them as some sort of restraint or some sort of way of becoming rigid in an unhelpful way. Instead, if you don't know where to start, where you can begin. is not to be turned into another rite or ritual. You want to understand your mind. You want to understand suffering, the first noble truth. And this teaching is another way that the Buddha has offered us an avenue out of samsara. After I finish reading this sutta, I will bring the talk to an end. And if you'd like, you can sit quietly contemplating this sutta for as long as you would like. And if need be, you can always come back to this and listen to it again or read it on your own time. So thank you everybody for your practice today. May you always have access to the Dhamma. May you always have affinity to practice the Dhamma and good conditions to practice the Dhamma. May you always be reborn where the Dhamma is available. And may you soon realize the threefold bliss. So may you soon be close to the Buddha. This was said by the Buddha, the perfected one. That is what I heard. Mendicants, suppose a mendicant were to hold the corner of my cloak and follow behind me step by step. Yet they covet sensual pleasures. They're infatuated, full of ill will and malicious intent. They are unmindful, lacking situational awareness and immersion, with straying minds and undisciplined faculties. Then they are far from me and I from them. Why is that? Because that mendicant does not see the teaching. Not seeing the teaching, they do not see me. Suppose a mendicant were to live 100 leagues away, yet they do not covet sensual pleasures. They're not infatuated or full of ill will and malicious intent. They have established mindfulness, situational awareness, and immersion with unified mind and restrained faculties. Then they are close to me, and I to them. Why is that? Because that mendicant sees the teaching. Seeing the teaching, they see me. The Buddha spoke on this matter. On this it is said, one full of desire and distress may follow close behind, yet see how distant they are, the stirred from the still, the burning from the quenched, and greedy from the greedless. An astute person who has understood and directly known the teaching grows calm like a lake unstirred by the wind. See how close they are, the still to the still, the quenched to the quenched, the greedless to the greedless. This too is a matter that was spoken by the Blessed One. That is what I heard. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.